in the 25th Separate Sikislav Airborne Brigade of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces. Women carry out combat missions on par with men. Under enemy fire, they operate strike and reconnaissance drones on the hottest Pokrovsk front. Watch our report. Throughout the story, there will be a QR code and a card number on the screen, so join in and support our paratroopers, both men and women. They are in urgent need of funds to purchase the most essential equipment for the front line.
The Spitz is small. Subscribe to the channel and give us a like.
You don't often see women in combat units. Britnina, callsign Pseudobug, captain in the Canadian Army. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, she has been training Ukrainian soldiers to operate the Leopard 2 tank. Later, she decided that she had to be where her skills would be most useful to the armed forces of Ukraine.
Everyone told me no. No to a tank crew position. 2 reasons. The main one was the language. Because at that time, I didn't speak Ukrainian. And the second was, of course, that I'm a woman. A woman in a tank? Not a chance. The 25th gave me a chance to sign a contract. A tanker. And I worked in the tank. I learned very quickly. T-80.
On her very first day in combat, the girl destroyed a concentration of enemy infantry.
The tank commander gave me the precise coordinates, and I was quickly in position. I fired the shot, and we successfully destroyed the entire train station where the enemy forces were hiding. It was my very first day out in the field, and I managed to hit the target perfectly. That was a really cool and memorable moment for me.
When heavy armored vehicles on the battlefield gave way to drones, Brittany learned to pilot FPVs.
It's adrenaline for me, when everything is exploding, when the drones are spinning. At that moment, I was really scared, of course, like everyone else. I'm afraid too. But once that brief moment has finally passed, I already feel a strong urge to go back and do it all over again. I truly wanted more time spent at the very front, and I found myself wishing for much more time out there on those missions.
In the same platoon serves Malika, who in civilian life worked with children with autism. Now she pilots a reconnaissance Mavic.
Back at the training center, everyone told me that no matter how much I wanted it, no one would let me go. There are no women at the positions. You'll be a clerk, you'll be a medic. They believed that no one would take me as a pilot.
But the girl works on par with the guys, and she only just left the position where she had stayed for 17 days. She says the hardest part is getting in and out.
Being at the positions, well, there are some nuances, but you come there to work. There are moments with artillery shelling, with enemy drones, but all of that can be avoided. Our guys who were relieving us, it took them 3 days to get in. We were lucky when we were leaving because there was a very thick fog, really thick. There were hardly any enemy drones, hardly any artillery shelling. Along the route we were taking, that's why we made it out very quickly in just 2 hours. We literally ran those few kilometers.
Masalyot, commander of the UAV platoon. He says he doesn't have girls or guys. All the service members, Brittany and Malika, perform their combat tasks well.
As for the pilots, I can say for sure that a woman can fly any drone, whether it's FPV, reconnaissance, or bombers. Absolutely any of them. The most important thing is that the person has the desire. When there's desire, that's 90% of success. She's full of energy. Brittany crazy.
The girls are also among the first to show initiative. Yes, recently Brittany carried out a difficult evacuation and saved her comrades.
2 wounded soldiers were just sitting there and waiting for their evacuation. And they said that the vehicles simply couldn't get through the area. So we had to carry them out on foot ourselves. We covered 8 kilometers on foot. As we were walking along that path, I distinctly remember that during those very first 10 minutes out on the road, a large vehicle suddenly drove right past us and unfortunately struck 2 landmines. On the 3rd day of our journey, just as we had finally finished the entire route, our driver attempted to pick us up in the late evening. However, he unfortunately couldn't make it to our location because he was suddenly hit by an FPV drone strike. Consequently, we were forced to spend the entire night there, waiting until another driver in a different vehicle could eventually come to pick us up, and that is how we finally got out safely.
The platoon's driver is a Roma. His job is to get the pilots closer to the position under the cover of enemy drones.
She acts like a real man. She is focused and takes this very seriously. always on alert. Good job, girl. I didn't expect it, but well done. Girls also perform tasks like being a pilot. They are fully capable of it.
The technological nature of modern warfare is gradually erasing the boundaries between men and women. Now women serve not only as clerks and medics, but are also successful in combat units. And the female pilots of the 25th Brigade of the 7th Rapid Response Corps of the NGU are a vivid example of this. Anna Ruda, Alexander Dovhan, specially for ICTV Fakti. United News.
The day before, the General Staff reported that in January, Ukraine's defense forces struck the Kapustin Yar training ground in Russia's Astrakhan region. That's the training ground from which Oreshnik is launched, and our forces struck it, among other things, with Flamingo missiles. Let's start our conversation with military expert and serviceman of the Territorial Defense Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Osienko. Mr. Alexander, welcome. What conclusions do you draw from the General Staff's report about the strike on Kapustin Yar, and how significant is this strike for us?
First and foremost, the strike is highly significant because there were intelligence reports indicating that the enemy was preparing an attack, which was expected to include the use of missiles, an Oreshnik missile on the territory of Ukraine. And as part of one of the combined missile and drone strikes, they intended to use, among other things, the Oreshnik missiles. And after carefully analyzing and taking all of this information into account, the National Defense Forces carried out a strategic operation to prevent this missile strike from ever happening. That is the first point to consider. Secondly, the goal was to actually undermine their international image and demonstrate to the world that Russia is unable to even protect the specific test site where these medium-range ballistic missiles are being launched. And in fact, this is to significantly diminish the capabilities and flexibility for the Russians, specifically ensuring that they cannot technologically launch this missile from other geographical launch sites, such as from Belarusian territory against Ukraine. That's impossible to do. They use the Astrakhan region, Kapustin Yar. Furthermore, and in addition, consequently, to proactively demonstrate that Kapustin Yar is within their reach. This was done so that Russia does not move the Oreshnik missile system there, and to prevent any further launches from that location against Ukrainian territory. And as we can clearly see now, the strike did not actually happen in January, but it is very likely that Russia was indeed planning it then. These were the findings of our intelligence community. The strike was a combined one. Various units of the defense and security forces took part in it, including the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. A series of long-range drones were deployed in the operation, as well as Flamingo missiles. We can clearly see that the strategy is effective, because direct hits have been recorded and there is significant visible destruction. At such training grounds, as a rule, there isn't much military infrastructure due to the technical specifics of these locations, but there is still some. But the most important thing in this situation is to show that Kapustin Yar is already within reach, and not for the first time. That we are ready to deter the enemy, including from launching such missiles. By the way, this is also a demonstration to our partners of how things can be done and that there is nothing to be afraid of. This includes even those moments when the Kremlin threatens to use a wide range of missile systems there. Because last time Russia specifically used the Oreshnik in the Lviv region for a strike, aiming to disrupt the strategic plans of the willing coalition to deploy military contingents. In the long run, I sincerely hope that comprehensive and binding security guarantees will eventually be signed, and that this will ultimately be a success for the region's stability. And Russia is very wary of the possibility that foreign troops might appear on the territory of Ukraine. That is precisely why they planned another missile strike to demonstrate their strength and intimidate the West. And that's exactly why, by the way, there was a missile and drone attack on the day NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte arrived. This was also intended to demonstrate that Putin supposedly isn't afraid of NATO, the EU, or anyone else. And once again, Ukraine is debunking yet another Russian myth and showing that there is nothing to be afraid of. We simply need to contain the aggressor and punish them for the crimes they commit.
Regarding not being afraid and punishing the aggressor, recently Senator Lindsey Graham once again called on Trump to give Ukraine Tomahawk missiles. If such a decision were to be made, say, in some alternative universe, how much time would our defenders need to master this weapon, and what would it take for us to do so?
You know, I recently read with great pleasure a fascinating interview with one of the experienced commanders of a Patriot battery, who was among the very first to undergo that specialized training. And in fact, this dedicated serviceman operating this Patriot system successfully shot down a sophisticated Kinzhal missile that was heading directly for Kiev back in May of 2023. And he specifically mentioned that they called the command of the Air Force, their commander from the USA. And they said, well, we've already learned everything. Take us back. We're ready to destroy enemy targets. In other words, they progress so quickly and their motivation to master and learn is so strong that everything goes according to accelerated programs. And then most importantly, it works. Therefore, from the perspective of the mechanics of the process, it naturally takes several weeks at the very least. We understand this so that we can grasp and realize how it functions, how it works, to show everything, plus the time needed for logistics and travel. It takes several weeks at the very least. So this process can take 2 to 3 months. As for Tomahawks, right now we're talking about the possibility that these could be Typhoon version missiles with a range of 1,400 to 1,600 kilometers. They are specifically modified for launch from ground-based launchers because, as a rule, the US uses Tomahawk missiles from surface positions, mainly from ships, that is, from the Navy. We don't have such capabilities because we don't have the appropriate carriers that could launch them from the sea. Like Russia, for example, can launch Caliber missiles, so ground-based ones are the second option, and this is very promising because the US itself would like to conduct more tests of Typhoon missiles. They need this as well. Next, how do the interests of Ukraine and the US intersect here strategically, in my opinion? The fact is that all the actions of the American administration and President Trump are now aimed at increasing opportunities in the oil market for oil from the US and now from Venezuela. Something needs to be done about it. And for this, Russia needs to be pushed out of the oil market. That's why sanctions have been imposed against Rosneft and Lukoil. If Ukraine had about 100 such missiles, combined with drones, we could carry out coordinated attacks on Russian targets in the Black Sea. The export oil facilities are Novorossiysk and Tuapse in the Black Sea, and in the Baltic Sea it's Ust-Luga and Primorsk. And about 2/3 of Russia's oil product exports pass through these facilities. Accordingly, this would reduce Russia's ability to profit from oil and would further deepen its financial problems. For us, this would be beneficial because the Russian budget deficit would increase, as would its constraints. Their ability to finance the war would decrease. For Putin and for the US, this is highly advantageous because it would significantly bolster their position in terms of oil sales by American corporations and allow them to enter markets where the United States was previously not as prominently represented. So from this perspective, it is promising. But of course, there is an understanding that all of this is in the political sphere. And do you actually remember that a few weeks ago, when this issue was relevant, CNN cited official Pentagon data about how the military said they could release a certain number of missiles from storage without harming the US's defense capability? So this decision is in the political sphere, but it's good that it is being revisited and drawing attention again, looking at it from the viewpoint that the awareness of pressure on Russia is present within the American establishment and politics.
Mr. Oleksandr, thank you for sharing your thoughts. That was Oleksandr Musienko, a military expert and a member of the Territorial Defense Forces of Ukraine.